right, good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Darger with the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Community Vitality, and welcome to Webinar 8 about unemployment here in our webinar series about during the pandemic. So thanks for joining us. This will be recorded as always, and we'll have it posted in a week or two. And I think all of our other 7 webinars are now posted, so you can access them at the website. I just want to acknowledge that this is Juneteenth Day, a very important day in American history, and our university president sent out a system-wide message today. This is the day that the last slaves in Galveston were told that they're free. And what a moment that must have been for them. And it's an important moment for all of us Americans in this time of questioning about racial, racism and racial equity. And I just want to acknowledge that at least a couple of Minnesota corporations have acknowledged this by providing this as a holiday for all of their full-time employees. Best Buy and Target Corporation have both acknowledged this important day in American history, not just for their Black employees, but for all employees. So, and that's what does that have to do with today's topic? Well, we're going to be talking about unemployment, and as most of you probably know, the unemployment statistics ticked down in May, but they ticked up for Black Americans and for some other groups, people of color, and I don't know all the stats, but I know that there continue to be racial equity issues in our country, and so we just need to acknowledge that. And that was the topic of our last webinar. There is an evaluation that we'll send you all, as Neil was noting a moment ago. We did this webinar because it was a topic that came up in a previous webinar, and so please give us your ideas and your feedback. You're welcome to send in questions on chat anytime during the session. We'll take them at the end. We may call on people if they raise their hand, but please do not call in or ask to be called on if you're driving a motor vehicle. And finally, I just want to thank Cameron Macht, who is the head of the labor market analysts across the state, and he knows everything about unemployment, and he's only going to tell us some today. And then Neil Linscheid, who is a community economics extension educator, and he'll be leading the discussion today. So take it away, gentlemen.
All right, thanks, Michael, and thanks again for being here, Cameron. We had your bio up on the slide before we started, and so I think folks had a chance to learn a little bit about you and your background. And I just want to share, I've known you for quite some time now. It's more than a decade. Out my entire career, I've known you, Cameron. And one thing that I'll assure people today is that you know your stuff. You know the data, but you also know that sometimes talking about data can be challenging and boring, and I've never seen you make it that way. So I'm really excited that you're here, and you're definitely a person that I really greatly respect, and I always am paying attention to the things that you're saying. Now, some of the things we wanted to cover today were really, I think we were hearing a lot of myths and questions and just curiosity about unemployment data. And it's really one of those big features in the news. We're seeing a lot of reporting around it. We're seeing a lot of sometimes misinformation about what it means, what it doesn't mean. And I think you're the person to help us all understand and get through some of that. So I know you have a few slides, and we can make sure to get those up if you're ready. But one of those things that we wanted to start with was a question of, what do you think the most important things people should understand about unemployment data are? And take it away, Cameron. I think you're ready.
Yeah, excellent. So thank you, Neil, and thank you, Michael. I love working with University of Minnesota Extension. It's a great partnership, and it has been a lot of fun getting to know you guys both over a couple decades now. So I think the purpose of today's presentation is to kind of challenge some of those assumptions. First, the assumption that you made, Neil, that I know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. I should be able to disprove that. And then also that I can do it without making it boring. I'm reasonably sure I can disprove that as well. We'll see how it goes. So my name is Cameron Macht. I'm the Regional Analysis and Outreach Manager for DEED. I'm also currently serving as the Acting Assistant LMI Director alongside our LMI Director, Orion Casal. Orion and our Commissioner, Steve Grove, have done a wonderful job of leading us through these challenging times. And to Michael's point earlier, these have really been a difficult set of months in Minnesota in many different ways. but we know that Minnesota is strong, and we'll get through this and we'll be better. We're very clear that DEED is going to play a critical role in the months and years of rebuilding that lie ahead. It's going to take all of us working together, and it's going to stretch us to do more and to do better than we've ever had to before. So we were lucky enough to be invited to talk about this data in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic because of the work we've been doing to try and provide economic information to the state. Like many of you, we've been extremely busy over the past 4 months due to the pandemic. The department that I work for also oversees the unemployment insurance program, does business and community development and financing, workforce development, and many other things. So our LMI office is just one small part of our agency, but we've probably never been this popular. Neil can back me up on this too. Usually if we're at a conference, we're the people who sit in the corner and everybody kind of avoids because they don't want to get stuck talking about labor force participation rates or unemployment rates for hours. But the nice thing is like now people actually want to know. So we've kind of been doing our best to try and share information that people can use. So we work in partnership with the Bureau of Labor Statistics to provide a set of useful employment and economic development or workforce data. The fact is, though, that almost all of our data is backward facing. Like we receive this information through surveys or through a census from businesses and people in the state of Minnesota. And then after some amount of time, and it varies based on the data set, we publish that back out. And so we're almost always looking backwards. And because of how fast things were changing during this pandemic period, people were really reaching out and looking for more real-time data. Now, this backward-looking data, all of the stuff that we are collecting, works great in normal times. We are able to help workforce and economic development partners identify trends, target industries and occupations, make projections for the future, and help them make smart, market-responsive planning decisions. So probably our most well-known data set is the monthly unemployment rate. This was actually released yesterday, and if you guys saw that, Minnesota's unemployment rate climbed to 9.9% in May. This is usually the data set that people are most interested in. It comes out every month. Typically, it will make the A section of the newspaper, and people follow it with great interest. Now, of course, up until March, we had been talking about a tight labor market that we were experiencing in the state and how it was actually even going to be a challenge for us to continue adding jobs in the future in the face of a slowing labor force growth. Then in March, everything changed. The COVID-19 pandemic took hold, and by April, the US unemployment rate spiked to 14.7%. Minnesota's rate went up to 8.7%. Though that was still among the lowest rates in the United States. The US rate bounced back a little bit in May to 13.3%, whereas ours went up slightly to 9.9%. And as you can see from the chart, this surge in unemployment is completely unprecedented in our state's history. We went from about 90,000 unemployed workers in March to about 300,000 unemployed workers by May. Unfortunately, this also pointed out some of the limitations with the data collection. The definitions of employment and unemployment, people have a lot of misperceptions about that. The small sample sizes for the surveys and the time frame that the data actually represents, just to name a few. So while unemployment rates are useful as an economic gauge, Laos data usually comes out 3 weeks into each month for the previous month. And during this pandemic, we saw things changing pretty much every week, which required more real-time data. You can see the other change that we've noticed that's important to point out in the state of Minnesota during this time frame. Between March and May, we've had about 55,000 people drop out of the labor force. And at the time, of course, we had been talking about a really tight labor force, so this might also be a challenge for the state moving forward. Now, a lot of it has to do with the economic conditions that we're facing. And again, we are still a little bit ahead of the United States overall. This chart is from the current employment statistics program. It usually is, or it actually always is released on the same day as the local area unemployment statistics. And you can see here it shows that Minnesota lost about 393,000 payroll jobs over the year in May. We actually saw a slight increase in comparison to April, so we had the same kind of bounce back that the US had overall. But year over year, we've lost more than 390,000 jobs. That's a 13% decline. Again, this change is simply unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that in the past. This chart actually shows what past recessions have looked like in terms of year over year employment loss. And this green line in the front is the 2020 recession. You can see again, dropped about 13% year over year in the past 2 months. We've never seen anything like that. So the question then that was asked in regards to this presentation is, how bad is it? And of course, the worst answer possible, but the one that I'll give you is that it really depends, right? It depends on the industry that you're in, depends on the region that you're located in, the occupation that you're currently employed in, or really it all comes down to a personal level. You know, what's interesting is that with the CARES Act and some of the other stimulus programs that the federal government has put in place, even people who have been laid off might say it isn't so bad thanks to the $600 benefits top off. Others, especially small businesses and the people that we were trying to help, have been impacted by the interruption and will struggle to get back to normal. And so we're also trying to help by help people make sense of it all through these significant economic changes. So this stuff is a little bit confusing, right? It can be a challenge to explain the difference in those two data sets, even to heavy users. So I'm going to do my best to help explain what's measured and how it can be used. So first things first, I think it's important to really understand what the components of the unemployment rate actually are. So in Minnesota and in every state in the United States, the unemployment rate is actually based heavily on the current population survey, which is a monthly survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, actually conducted by the Census Bureau, and it covers about 900 households in the state of Minnesota. So it's a really small sample size. Unemployment rate comes down to three main categories. The first is the civilian labor force, and this includes all persons in the civilian non-institutional population that are age 16 years and older and can be classified as either employed or unemployed. All of those who are 16 and older but don't have a job or aren't working, which can include like students, people who are staying home to raise children, people who are retired, or people who are out of the labor force for any other reason, are not included in this count of civilian labor force. They are considered not in the labor force. Second is then within this civilian labor force, one group is considered employed people, and that includes all persons who during the reference week, which always includes the 12th of each month. So again, one of the reasons that the March unemployment rate didn't move is because it included the week of the 12th of March, and most of the pandemic containment measures didn't start until after March 16th. So employed workers include anyone who did any work as paid employees, worked in their own business or profession or on their own farm, or worked 15 hours or more as unpaid workers in an enterprise operated by a member of their family, or were not working, but who had jobs from which they were temporarily absent because of vacation, illness, bad weather, childcare problems, maternity or paternity leave, labor management dispute, job training, or other family or personal reasons, whether or not they were paid for the time off or were seeking other jobs. In this case, LAOS is a count of people, not jobs. So each employed person is counted only once, even if they have multiple jobs. And then finally, unemployed people. These are all persons who had no employment during the reference week, were available for work except for temporary illness, and had made specific efforts to find employment during the 4-week period ending with the reference week. So as long as they were looking for a job within the past month, they are considered unemployed. People who are waiting to be recalled from a job from which they had been laid off don't have to be looking for work, but they are still considered unemployed because they aren't currently working, but they are waiting to be called back. So those are the three components, and all of the information that's presented in the local area unemployment statistics comes from this specific data set. The unemployment rate then is just the comparison of the number of unemployed people from the total civilian labor force. Now this represents the U3 rate, which is the official rate that is published each month. In addition, there are three other unemployment rates that are also calculated but not as well known. The U4 rate includes discouraged workers. Those are people who have looked for a job in the past 12 months, but did not look in the past 4 weeks because they believe there are no jobs available or anything that they are currently qualified for. This represents untapped potential in the labor market, but in recent years, this number was close to 0. I mean, the difference was only 0.1% between the U3 and U4 rate. Almost everyone who wanted a job in recent years was able to find a job during that time frame. Now, in the wake of COVID-19, this number is ticked upward, but it's still relatively close to the U3 rate. Second is the U5 rate, which also includes marginally attached workers. These are people who might have had a job in the past year or looked in the past year, but are not actively seeking work. So these might be people who have reached retirement age and just aren't interested in looking anymore, but potentially could be drawn back into the labor force if the right opportunity came up. Again, this number had been very low in recent years, but also started to tick upward in April and May. Finally, the big one is the U6 rate, which includes all of those groups previously mentioned, the discouraged workers and the marginally attached workers, plus workers who are now working part-time but would prefer to be working full-time, which is defined as 32 hours per week or more. This number is typically about double the U3 rate and also jumped in May. It's important to note that because our CPS sample size is so small in the state of Minnesota, these are 12-month rolling averages. So they're gonna look really funny. Like even the U6 unemployment rate in May was only 7.6%, but it's because there's 12 months of data going into that specific number for this month. We'll start to see it tick upward throughout the next couple months as well. So what's interesting is the number of unemployed people and the unemployment rate that we were just talking about are completely distinct from the number of people applying for or currently receiving benefits through the unemployment insurance program. As you may have seen, right now the state of Minnesota has received about 791,000 applications for unemployment insurance benefits. But yet earlier I was talking about how our estimate is that there's about 300,000 people who are currently unemployed. Unemployment insurance applicants do not represent the population of unemployed for a couple reasons. First, not everyone who is unemployed applies for UI. For example, people who are starting a job search after a time away from the labor market would be counted as unemployed, but would not have had a recent employer and therefore wouldn't have had the opportunity to apply for UI benefits. Others simply choose not to apply for UI or run out of UI benefits before they find a job. All of these people are unemployed if they're actively seeking work, but are not receiving UI benefits. Workers can also apply for and receive benefits if their hours have been cut, but they're still working. So this would cause an overcount of unemployment because these people are actually still employed, even if they're receiving UI. The UI program is actually used during the pandemic by employers who can stay open but at reduced capacity. Also, people can be collecting UI benefits and still be counted as employed in the louse numbers if they have a second job in which they worked at least 1 hour for pay during the reference week. And Minnesota has a higher rate of multiple job holding compared to the nation, although it's still a relatively small percentage of the overall labor force. Unemployment insurance applications are one input into the louse rate, but CPS is more important. So as the pandemic spread and our leaders put stay-at-home orders in place, our economic situation was changing rapidly. Much of our monthly data for March had actually been collected before the stay-at-home orders were even enacted, which put us at a bit of a disadvantage. So one of the things that's typically overlooked is the unemployment insurance applications program. And it suddenly became a very useful and popular data set since we were able to provide updates every week and even every day. Our existing tool actually gets updated every month. So you can see an example of it here in the lower right-hand side of the screen, showing unemployment insurance claims for May. It's presented as a table, and it has a yearly change percentage included, and also has breakdowns for industries, occupations, age, education, gender, and race. We can use this data, and we have used it in the past, especially during the Great Recession. But more recently, it just wasn't all that popular because of how tight the labor market was at the time. So we needed to provide updates because we were getting dozens of media requests each day, and we needed to provide data to our partners and stakeholders, including state leaders, businesses, workforce development partners, economic development professionals, and the media. So we worked with our UI team to get access to the data and quickly built a Tableau visualization that provides a count of cumulative UI applications that gets updated every day and also provides weekly updates. It now includes a map that shows cumulative applications by county as a share of their 2019 labor force, which has been incredibly valuable in showing which counties have been hit the hardest by the pandemic-related layoffs and shutdowns. Different parts of the state have been impacted in different ways, and this tool helps us provide insight into that dynamic. For example, while Hennepin County has seen more than 175,000 UI applications through the end of May, several counties in western Minnesota had seen less than 350 claims so far. A couple of Minnesota counties still had April unemployment rates below 4%, if you can believe it. So the tool itself contains, one of the nice things though about Laos data is that we can use the unemployment insurance application information to help inform unemployment rates at the county level. So next Tuesday, when the information is released at the county level, you'll start to see some of the areas that have been hit much harder by the COVID-related shutdowns. So the tool itself contains 4 main tabs. The first tab contains demographic information for the state, all 6 planning regions, and major cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. Users can find data separated by week and by age group, education level, gender and veteran status, as well as race and ethnicity. It's important to note that this data is actually self-reported by the people who are filing the claims, which makes it very useful in understanding who is being affected and who is going to need help in recovery and reemployment. The Twin Cities is home to about 60% of the state's jobs and has accounted for the majority of the UI applications filed so far. But every region has different characteristics that we can point out to our partners. The Occupations tab provides a cumulative count of claims filed by occupational group. So not surprisingly, the largest number of claims filed so far has been by food and beverage serving workers, retail sales workers, and cooks and food prep serving workers, which is very unique to this situation, as well as like construction and production workers, which is what typically make up a large concentration of the claims. Again, this allows us to see which occupations were hit hardest and which are seeing upticks in claims as the economic fallout from the pandemic continues. While claims for food prep workers have dropped in recent weeks, claims for health diagnosing and treating practitioners have been holding steady and even increasing in some regions in the state. We're able to quickly identify and point these details out so our partners know how to respond. Finally, we've added a county details tab to provide additional information for our stakeholders at the local level. This includes the same demographic details and also provides some occupational detail with a minimum of 10 UI applications per cell. This county level data will no doubt be helpful to our workforce development partners moving forward. In addition, our regional analysis team have created a variety of visualizations to help show the impacts across the state. This includes a tool that gets updated once per week to provide UI applications as a % of total employment, and also identifies where new layoff activity is picking up by looking at the increase in UI applications by week. While the Twin Cities has most of the UI activity, counties in Northeast and Northwest were hit hardest. Several counties have had more than a third of their labor force filing UI applications. In contrast, Southwest has been much less affected, and counties that had food manufacturers that were shut down saw brief spikes in unemployment activity, but have since slowed down. We can point out that type of information to people. Our team is here to provide data to local partners. We're happy to help react to changes in the local economy. Please reach out to this group as early and as often as you can. We're happy to help. I hope that this was helpful overall, that it mostly made sense. And I look forward to answering any questions you guys might have.
Well, Cameron, I want to tell you, this was really very helpful. And sometimes on our webinars, we like to keep it, more conversational, but there's just so much that you had to share here that letting you have the floor is absolutely the right thing to do. And I know that I've presented on webinars and I've been positive that people participating didn't gain any value from what I shared with them. And I think you can feel confident going to sleep tonight that people learned an enormous amount from what you shared with us in just a few minutes today. Now, one of the things that we promised was a lightning round, which, that could be sort of fun for you. There's some questions in the chat that I'd like to add to our lightning round mix just to keep you on your toes. One was, what percentage of the U3 unemployment is related to the food and beverage industry? Do you have that one on your fingertips?
So unfortunately, that's not how the Laos data gets collected. We can't link the unemployment record through the CPS to their specific occupation or industry. But what we do know is, I don't know off the top of my head, I think it's about 20% or maybe it's about 15% of UI claims that have been filed so far have come through the accommodation and food services industry.
Nice.
If I stop sharing,
okay.
I can probably look that up.
Well, we'll move on to the next question here. Lightning round is got to be lightning, right? That's the fun of it. Are self-employed workers included in wage and job recovery data?
Yeah, so self-employed workers are included in the Laos data set. When people get called and asked if they have a job, if they are self-employed, they would be included. They've also now been included in the unemployment insurance applications because through this pandemic unemployment assistance program. And so far we've had about 100,000 claims filed in the state for people who are self-employed.
Wow. All right. Next one. Is there a unemployment wage cap?
Yes. So in the state of Minnesota, typically UI pays about 50% of whatever your wages were prior to being laid off, up to a cap of $740. So, and then of course there is also the $600 top off.
Mm-hmm. Okay. To what extent are people staying on unemployment?
So we have something on long-term unemployment. Those are people who are unemployed at least 26 weeks or longer. There actually has been an extension now of unemployment through the CARES Act as well. But in Minnesota, because our labor market was so tight going into this, the number of people who are long-term unemployed is still relatively low. It was 11,600 workers in May of 2020.
Lightning. It's amazing that you know this stuff. What is the time limit for people to receive UI benefits?
Typically, it's 26 weeks. Of course, it varies based on each person's individual situation. But there may be extensions that are coming out of this situation, so it may end up being longer. If people remember back to the Great Recession, there were some people who were on unemployment insurance benefits for over a year.
And another question, I know we hear about it sometimes, never know if it's true. Have there been fraudulent filings for unemployment benefits? How does that work?
Yeah, so there definitely are opportunities for fraud in unemployment insurance, although Minnesota does a really good job of managing that. The most recent analysis of Minnesota's UI program showed that only about 7.3% of payments were overpayments, and that was due to a whole bunch of different reasons. And I'll include a link to that in the presentation that I send to you and share after this presentation, if it's all right. But we have actually, we've heard a little bit about some increasing amounts of fraud. And so preventing and identifying fraud is something that the Minnesota Unemployment Insurance Program does on a continuous basis. Obviously, we can't provide data on any specific accounts, but we have seen an increase in recent weeks and are aware that some local law enforcement agencies are investigating potential fraudulent activity. The UI program also has a variety of cross-match process and tools that allow us to identify suspicious accounts, and we're stepping up efforts to prevent fraudulent payments. We do sometimes refer cases to the BCA and to agents with the US DOL Office of the Inspector General. One common way that fraud is discovered is if a person who did not apply for unemployment receives a determination of benefit account letter. So if in those cases or any others where people may suspect fraud, we remind and ask Minnesotans to report it immediately. If you go to our UI website, which is www.uimn.org, you can find information on how to report fraudulent activity. And so we count on everyone to help us with that.
So one last lightning round question, and this is a great one. It seems like Deed in Minnesota has been a leader in getting needed assistance to workers and families. Is that true? I mean, that what's really happened?
Yeah, so we were actually the first state in the United States that was able to issue the extra $600. And we also were the first ones to implement the 13-week extension for those people who were on long-term unemployment insurance. We were also one of the first to provide the self-employed UI assistance for people who had applied, and that's not something that we typically do. There are some other states that have natural disasters quite frequently, like hurricanes or earthquakes or things along those lines. We typically don't do the disaster unemployment insurance, so it was really fantastic how quickly Deed responded, and our unemployment insurance program deserves a lot of credit for how well they've handled this, how quickly they've handled it, and just big kudos out to all of them.
Well, I see one question in the chat, and I think this might have to be our last question before we do a soft close, which Michael will talk about. And this is from Elton Mikarizi. It's has generally been difficult to estimate the importance of the gig economy. And do you think the data on UI applications from gig workers from this year can provide some unique insight into that general issue?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So Deed, as you guys know, we don't have the greatest information on self-employment because it's not covered by the UI program in general. So typically what we're relying on is Census Bureau data and information from the IRS on people who are filing self-employment income. And it's really hard to get an idea of how many of those are actually using self-employment as their primary source of income. And so we had made some estimates early on in this pandemic process about how many people might file for unemployment insurance who are self-employed. And it has been tremendously useful to see the actual number that are coming in, and we'll be able to get additional information on those people, you know, like what industries they're operating in, what their wages were within past years, and really try and get a better understanding of self-employment. So far, as I said a little bit earlier, we've had about 100,000 people file for unemployment insurance who are self-employed, and we had made a guess of around 120,000 that might be in that situation originally. So we felt pretty confident that we came close on our estimate and that we had a good grasp on self-employment. But it was nice to see that type of UI information. We'll definitely try and use that to provide additional insight moving forward.
Thank you so much, Cameron. The final thing I'd just like to say before I hand it to Michael is, I know in economic development, if you're not calling Cameron or the people on the team with Cameron and making them part of your economic development strategy and team and involving them, it's a real missed opportunity. Every single time I've ever called or interacted with people on your team that do the work that you do, I've found it helpful and responsive, and just thanks for all the work you do for all of us here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Take it away, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. This is wonderful. This is what we call our soft stop. We will send the recording out in a week or two, but if people have time, and if you have time for another 10 minutes, we'll keep going, Cameron. But just for people who have to go, you know, I don't think people really worry about it these days because we always drift in and out of these webinars. But, you know, our promise is to keep it to half an hour. So I'll send this link later to those of you who came to the event. But if you get a chance to take the evaluation form, that's tremendously helpful. And then Cameron, maybe you can put on your screen that picture of your team again, because I think people need to put the faces with the regions and go ahead and promote your team, and then we'll just take some more questions. I'll throw it back to you, Neil.
All right, thanks. Yeah, there was another question here that we want to look at. I think it was from Kathy. It was up a little bit further. She listened to Neil Kashkari from the Federal Reserve this week, and he said the unemployment is closer to 20% now, since stats only report those actively looking. And I think you mentioned some of that information in the lag in the data. And so maybe just a reaction to that. Federal Reserve maybe saying 20%, maybe there's other numbers out there. How does that happen? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes from how local area unemployment statistics are calculated. It is a very specific piece of data that we're reporting, and it is only the U3 rate that actually gets published. So even just including the U6 rate, if we assume that it's about double what the U3 rate is, which has been the pattern in past years, if our unemployment rate now is 9.9%, I guess 20% does seem reasonable. And I don't know if he's talking about for the state of Minnesota or if he's talking about the nation as a whole. So again, hopefully what I helped explain during the presentation is that people who are discouraged and aren't actively seeking right now are not considered unemployed. And so if he's including those people in the 20% that he is suggesting, that could definitely make up for it. And so as the economy begins to recover and more jobs are available, we might see more people come back into the labor force, and that might actually push the the unemployment rate upward.
We had another question here from Sean Sullivan, and he asked about the percentage of U3 unemployment being for part-time jobs. Any sense of that?
Yeah, that one's actually easy. So that's 0%. If you have a part-time job, you are considered employed, not unemployed. So
should have been a lightning round question. We'll remember that for next time, right?
Yeah, even if you worked 1 hour, which is an extremely part-time job, then you would be considered employed.
Great. We have a question here from Bridget about the initial claims versus unemployment data will be really interesting. Help point to who is going back to work. Will they help point to who is going back to work? Maybe.
Yeah, so all of the data that's being published on the unemployment insurance applications page is just a count of people who have filed a claim, not necessarily actually received it. And then also it doesn't show when they've been called back to work and started working again. So the 791,000 is the absolute top number. It doesn't suggest that there are 791,000 unemployed people in the state. That's just how many people have applied for UI. Many of those people would have come back to work already. Many of those people might have applied just because they went from a full-time job to a part-time job. So if they had their hours cut, they could still have filed for unemployment insurance. And not everybody who applies actually ends up receiving UI benefits either. It will help point to who is going back to work once we get the monthly tool. So if you were to actually look at the May 2020 unemployment insurance claims statistics, you can see initial claims and then also continuing claims. And the continuing claims gives you a much better picture of what's actually happening in the economy and how many people are returning to work.
Sure. And there was just a clarification here from Sean about his question. I think he was asking how many people that held part-time jobs are now unemployed, as opposed to sort of if you have a part-time job, are you unemployed?
Sure. Yep. That level of detail is not available, unfortunately.
Okay.
That's a great question, though. I mean, it'd be fascinating to know that answer.
So really a lot of great things coming in here. One question that was just in the private here, so I'll keep the person's name confidential, I guess. It's where could you direct people looking for reports or webinars on COVID-19 impacts by industry in Minnesota? For example, which industries are hit hardest, but also which industries appear to be rebounding more quickly, places that we have reports. I know Bridget's done a little bit on our team around this, and we have some reports we could maybe find. Your team, have you had that industry level detail? It seems like those tools that you were showing, you could create your own.
Yeah, so if you go to DEED's website and go to the regional labor market page, there is a set of industry profiles that we put together for all of the industries that were hit the hardest. So retail, trade, personal care, and services, accommodation and food services, the larger leisure and hospitality industry, casinos, manufacturing, construction, all of those areas we have data put together. And if you have additional questions, certainly, your team is great about working with people. Our team is the same way. Feel free to reach out to the team wherever it is that you're located in the state. They'll respond quickly and provide the type of information that you might need. I should also note, too, I looked earlier, and it was 14.4% of UI claims so far have been filed in the accommodation and food services industry.
Nice.
So I guess 15.
So you multitasked while explaining unemployment statistics. You also were able to look those up.
That's pretty good,
now
Cameron.
I'm double impressed. I just want to let everyone know there's a lot of great things in the chat box, and maybe you'll see these too, Cameron. Another comment from Elton that one of his colleagues, Aaron Sojourner at Carlson School, has done some work forecasting UI applications by using Google search and the related terms to that. So probably pretty high interest to you. If you look at the link that Elton shared, you can check that out. And I'm sure either Elton or Aaron would enjoy talking with you as an expert in this field, and maybe they'd share more about that. Bridget's saying she likes the Small Business Pulse survey, and Sean's telling us that Greater MSP has done a great job of putting together sectors that were hardest hit. And that's definitely the case. They really have done a great job. And then Bridget's sharing a link to the portal. So a lot of good stuff in the chat. And thanks for responding to all these questions, Cameron.
There was one thing in the national statistics that was in my comment, which was that the unemployment was supposed to be underreported in that May, when the May numbers ticked down nationally. And that was like people who had erroneously reported them as still being employed, and they picked the other category, but in fact they were unemployed. Can you give us any more detail on that?
Yeah, so there definitely have been some challenges, and I've seen different articles that have been written about how perfectly accurate these data are. One of the things, Orion actually is working with the national BLS group of LMI directors to try and make sure that local area unemployment statistics is as accurately as possible reflecting the current economic situation. It really wasn't designed to react to this kind of change, this kind of rapid change. And certainly there is confusion that people have as they're trying to fill out or respond to these surveys. And so and because of how defined each of the categories are in how the unemployment rate actually gets calculated, if some people are confused into how they should be answering it, it can make an impact on the survey results. But that is something that we are aware of, something that we're doing the best we possibly can to react to and make better in future surveys.
Great. Well, we've come to the hard stop time, and thanks again to Cameron Macht and to Neil Linscheid for this fascinating conversation. I also want to give a shout out to our program leader here in Extension, Bruce Schwartow, who's been the technologist smoothly handling things behind the scene, which is an important role in these webinars. And for all of you really driving a really interesting, provocative conversation, I will send out my copy of the chat log along with the evaluation link to all of you. And we don't have any future webinar schedule, but look for this at our website, which is again the z.umn.edu BRE webinars, and we'll be having future sessions. So thanks much, and everyone have a great weekend.